Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. Sam, thank you very much for those very generous words. Not sure if I stand up to that or not, but it was a thrill for me to be asked to come out and address a group on a topic which has been all of my life, has really been the law. I went to law school and college in the 70s, a time of turmoil, a time when people were exercising their rights, a time when people were searched without search warrants, a time when persons of minority races were treated differently than other persons were. And it really fascinated me. In college, we had a great fraternity advisor who was a lawyer and who influenced a lot of us to want to kind of go into this field and got us studies. And I studied in the prison, the Trenton State Prison, and I met somebody who had been convicted of murder. So in talking about his rights and his rights to excessive punishment, he was on death row. Those kinds of rights were fascinating to a 19-year-old. And I kind of got very involved with that. So I kind of finished up. I went to law school, and I was really enamored with our Constitution. And when you think about it, that Constitution has withstood time from the late 1700s to even now. Adams and Jefferson and Monroe and Madison, when especially they wrote the Bill of Rights, those rights which would be guaranteed to people when they came to the colonies. They wanted to get away from England. They wanted to get away from the state church. They wanted to have freedoms to do what they wanted to do. And the only way that people would accept the Constitution, which the first part sets the government up, but the other part of it delineates those kinds of rights which people would have, which could not be deprived of them when they came here. Such rights like freedom of expression, freedom to practice your own religion the way you would like to do that, freedom to be able to say what you'd like to do, other than yelling fire in a crowded theater or advocating the overthrow of the government. But when we have people that say mean things about maybe our politicians and so on, I'm very proud of the fact that our government really will stand up and say they have a right to do that no matter what. We talked about the right to bear arms. That's been an issue right from the Revolutionary War. The Founding Fathers thought that you ought to have the right to protect yourself from the government if they want to come in. Yet today we still talk about that. The latest Supreme Court case that came out had to do with a landlord and tenant situation, where a tenant wanted to carry his weapon because he lived in a difficult area in New York City. The lease indicated that you couldn't have weapons. He told the landlord he was going to violate that because he was afraid for his life, and he had a Second Amendment right to do so. He went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and they upheld his right to bear arms. So then, of course, you get into the issue of all the shootings we're having now and the assault weapons we're having now and the debates that are coming up about, are these weapons of war or are they weapons just to protect oneself? All of this, and I don't even know whether Madison and those people thought that it would go that far, but nonetheless, those very simple words that one has a right to bear arms, very simple, very short, yet it's been interpreted for years and years. The right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. We appreciate in our country that we are not watching television in our living room and all of a sudden the door breaks in and we have the Gestapo, the officers, wanting to search what we have. And after going through everything and rummaging through everything and maybe not finding anything, they basically look to the homeowner and say, sorry, and walk out. Well, we have rights about that. You just can't go in and be displaced like that unless the officer has a warrant based on probable cause, which a judge reviewed before you're going to go in and interrupt someone in their home place like that. The right to counsel. Many times people had to face court without an attorney. Not that attorneys are any great shake, but we are skilled in the law, and especially if I'm going against somebody that doesn't have counsel, I really don't like to do it because they don't really understand the rules of evidence, but it is more difficult, yet they do have a right. And I say, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you get an attorney? I can't afford one. I understand that. I charge $500 an hour. So I do understand when simple people say, I have legal problems, but I can't afford to do that. You have a right to have a jury of your peers. You have a right not to have cruel and unusual punishment. You have a right to have due process of law and equal protection of the law. Very simple phrases. I was in law school once, and the professor, the whole final exam was, what's due process of law? I said, is he kidding? 3-hour exam, what is due process? But it's the concept of fairness. Before the government's going to take away your property, There has to be due process, a fairness without that. Can't be cruel and unusual punishment. The death penalty is one of those issues today about whether or not the state executing somebody is cruel or is it unusual. I think Texas executes maybe 2 people every single month. Various other states have other rates of execution, but we probably have more executions than maybe some of the Asian countries, which will execute people in the back of the building or something. I've had cases like that. I've had 2 murder cases, and they were bad people, but they had rights. They had constitutional rights which are guaranteed to them. And even though they weren't my friends, and they weren't people that I respect, I had to say, but they're people that the government must respect. They have a right to this. It's a civil right. Who am I to say you don't have a right to do that? Because somebody might say that to me in that situation. When you look at the death penalty especially, it's very interesting. During the Manson time, Charles Manson, late 60s, the death penalty was unconstitutional. It meant the state could not do that. The horrific things that those people did between Charles Manson and all of the people that he was with, the murders they committed, I think they got 99 years in prison. Well, philosophically, what's the difference in 99 years or maybe life? But nonetheless, they didn't get the death penalty because it was unconstitutional. Violated the 8th Amendment. Well, then we went all the way up into 1977, Gary Gilmore of the United States, and all of a sudden now it is constitutional. Gary Gilmore wanted to be executed. He was in Utah by a firing squad, and since then it's been constitutional. So this idea about why is something unconstitutional and 2 years later it's constitutional, that has to do with the judges that are appointed. Now today people are very, very aware of Supreme Court nominees. President Biden has recently nominated Judge Ketanji Brown, a liberal person, brilliant, Court of Appeals, but someone of his political following. President Trump had selected 3 people on the court, very, very conservative. And if we look at the other justices on the court, we have another 2 conservative justices. So perhaps we have a majority of conservatives on the Supreme Court bench who serve a life term and who no one's going to fire, unless they get impeached, but no one's going to fire them because of the opinion that they wrote. So it's always fascinating to me when someone appeals in those kinds of situations and really philosophically it kind of falls down on those lines. So let's say that we have maybe 2 more justices that might be appointed by President Biden. And let's say they happen to replace maybe a Justice Clarence Thomas or a justice who might be older. That can change very much the balance of the court. When I was in college in the 70s, we had rights for everything. And if you read, the case was thrown out and people walked away. Miranda versus Arizona, you've heard about. He was a murderer. But he wasn't read his rights. Right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. Wasn't read that. The court said, you weren't read that. Anything we got, your confession, must be thrown out. He walked away with a smile on his face out of the courtroom. I've had clients like that. Earlier in my practice, I did more criminal matters. But I've represented people that were probably guilty. But because the state did not support their rights, questioned them without counsel, or something like that, it vitiated the whole matter, and the only remedy is to dismiss the case and the person walks out. Now, one might say, well, that's not fair, I don't like that. But the other part of the law that I think is fascinating is it tries to be consistent. We have something in the law called precedent, and we try to make a decision, and then 2 years later, if another case comes along that's very similar, the court tries to decide it the same way. So now we have 2 cases that are very much alike. And what does that do? It allows the people to know, well, this is what the law is. This is what the government will tolerate, and I can't go beyond that. You know, I always liked, when I became a lawyer, that people would call me a counselor. Counselor. I kind of love that. I love the idea that you would come in and tell me your situation, and because of all this studying I had done, somehow I kind of know what the law says, what the judges may say, and what you should do in your situation. My favorite movie is The Godfather, and in the beginning, Marlon Brando is talking to his son, and the son is talking about the other brother who is the lawyer, and he said he's the consigliere, Very important, he gives advice. And that's really what lawyers do, they give advice. I can't guarantee what happens. When I go into court sometimes, I shudder. If I have a jury trial, I may not know what they're going to do, and blood pressure goes up, very exciting, and then I've got to wait like everybody else to find what goes on, and I don't know, I can't predict it. Certain things may be impressive to them. The jury system is a beautiful system because you've got people, 12 people, that all came from different walks of life. They all have their own opinions. They look at you, they size you up, they listen to what you say, they determine who's credible and not, and they go back and they do a great service to our country. And they wait a day, 2 days, 5 days, whatever it's going to be, until they make a decision. And they come back out. They've taken time off from work. They've been ridiculed, perhaps. But it was their civic duty, and they did it, and justice was had. Many of you have seen the Alec Murdaugh case that recently has occurred. Here's somebody who apparently felt he was above the law. His great-grandfather, very wealthy, everything they had done through their community. And apparently he got into a situation, he said, well, I guess I need to kill my son and my wife, and for whatever reason, and maybe he kind of thought he could get away with it. Well, he certainly didn't. And I think that stands for the proposition that wealth or prominence is not necessarily going to prevent you. I've got always a couple people that are in the prison, and I may go once a month or something like that. And when I get out of the prison, I kind of stand at the front door, whether it's in Smyrna or whether, in Delaware or whether it's down in Sussex County. And I always take a deep breath. And my law clerk was with me one day, and he goes, why did you do that? And I said, because it's free. It's free air. No one's going to count me. No one's going to feed me something I don't want. I'm sleeping in a nice bed tonight, all of these things. And I really get an appreciation for, I live in a country that kind of stands behind my rights, whatever they may be. Now, this is not to say that some people don't have bad situations. They do. Some people pay a lot of money to get legal help, and they get convicted anyway, or something happened to them. I get people on the civil side, maybe that are not completely truthful with me, and things don't work out for them. So there's all kinds of things that really happen like that. If we look on the side of race relations, again, that's something which is kind of a problem. Is it a legal problem? Is it a social problem? Really, what is it? If we look in the United States, really from the 1700s, when persons of color came over really as property, which could be bought and sold, and then we have Lincoln, who decides, let's free everybody in the Emancipation Proclamation. Then we have the Constitution. All persons shall have equal protection of the law. Yet, 1880, 1890, we still have minorities that are in a difficult situation. And then we have Plessy versus Ferguson, 1892. Separate but equal is okay. You have a car, a train car, you have one. Perfectly okay. Well, that was the law for like the next 50 years until we got Brown versus Board of Education. You're familiar with that. The court said separate but equal is not equal. You're not going to get equal education if you've got separate and separate, but if you put them together, you have diversity, and that's where that started out, diversity of citizenship. So this is kind of the way the law is going to develop, like that. We have legislation which the Congress tries to kind of enact in order to see the kind of needs we have. One of the biggest ones was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. John Kennedy said, we can't have these relations between blacks and whites in this country, so we're going to pass this massive law. And the important part of it is Title VII that says there should be no discrimination in public places on the basis of race, creed, color, national origin. And he realized that would be very difficult to get passed, especially in the South. Of course, President Kennedy was assassinated in '63, so it was up to President Johnson in '64 to kind of get this thing passed through. And Johnson was one of these strong-arm kind of politicians. He'd have a card game, he'd have a bottle of bourbon, and he would strong-arm a lot of these senators and get them to go along with what he wanted to do, kind of like Winston Churchill, perhaps, that we've read about. But that was the kind of a leader that Johnson was. And nonetheless, the Civil Rights Act was passed. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to accept it. We have all kinds of cases challenging that. We have restaurants that say, we're not a public place, we're a private dining club, and we don't have this group, we only want this group. And the courts have had to fight over and over again. We have a case in Wilmington, Delaware, Burton versus Wilmington Parking Authority. Professional black man goes into a restaurant and he's denied service because they didn't want him in there. This is like in the 60s. And all of a sudden he gets arrested for trespassing, not the worst crime, but he's arrested. Imagine being arrested when you want to have dinner someplace. And then he goes to the Supreme Court of Delaware, affirmed. He said, I'm not finished yet. I'm going to the U.S. Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall, the justice, and Lewis Redding, the first black attorney in Delaware, represented him and had the case reversed. That stands for the proposition that you cannot discriminate in a public place, in a restaurant, on the basis of race, creed, color, national origin. So little Delaware, a life-changing thing because the Supreme Court made that decision in the 60s like that. We've had all kinds of decisions that have come across like that. Everybody perhaps today is aware that former President Trump has been indicted on 34 counts. Now, not to get into a political discussion at all, but this was a significant legal day. It's the first time ever in the United States where this kind of thing has happened. People say to me, well, what do you think should happen? It's not important. To me, the significance is that no one's really above the law. If you or I were involved in activities which the grand jury decided they wanted to go further, and if the former president did the same thing, then both of us really should face the same music, if you look at it that way. No one really wants to see a president go to jail. I was fearing today that we'd have a president coming in handcuffs, walking in, like many of my clients do. I hate it when people are handcuffed. I hate it especially when women are handcuffed. I don't know what it is, but to see a woman have to put her hands behind her back and go into a place, and I represented a woman who killed her husband, so if anybody should have been handcuffs, maybe her. But nonetheless, to see this today, we have 34 counts, felony counts. I haven't read all of what they are. I've been a lawyer many years. I've never had a client with 34 counts, especially felony counts. So it'll be interesting from my point of view as a lawyer to kind of see how this plays out. The president will never plead guilty to anything. So does that mean he's going to go to trial? And if he goes to trial, you've got people like this Michael Cohen, that was his lawyer before, who's a convicted felon also. I would love to cross-examine someone like that who's trying to bring down a defendant in that situation. So this is remarkable. The only time this happened in politics really was the Watergate. And we all remember the Watergate. And we had President Nixon that even though he was not there burglarizing the Watergate Hotel, he knew about it. It was on the tapes. And it was very clear that he was involved in that. So we have a worry about a conspiracy to commit burglary, a felony also. And that's why he didn't want the tapes revealed. And that's why that went all the way to the court. We're in the district court. They said, Mr. President, turn the tapes over. He said, I'm not going to do that because I'm the president. And also, it's a matter of public security in the world, and I'm the one who can judge that. And the Constitution does say that. Well, Judge Sirica said, this is not a national security issue. Turn the tapes over. You're not above the law. I refused to do it. Went to the Court of Appeals. Affirmed. They told him the same exact thing. And then he went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, one of the judges, I think it was Rehnquist, recused himself because they had been friendly. The decision was 8-0, making him turn the tapes over. The Supreme Court had to tell him to do that. That night, if you recall, Barry Goldwater and all of the leading Republican senators went to the White House and indicated, we cannot possibly prevent an impeachment tomorrow. 2 hours later, we watched him on television resigning his office. First time that's ever happened also. And then, of course, we had to look to the Constitution as to what to do. If you remember when President Kennedy was assassinated, we had President Johnson, who was the vice president, had 4 heart attacks. What if something happened to him? Well, then we had the Speaker of the House, John McCormick, I think was like 88. And then we had the President pro tem of the Senate, Carl Hayden, who was, I think, 90. So we realized, wait a minute, what happens if our president dies or gets thrown out or what happens? How are we going to make sure we have a continuity of power? This was decided in the 70s. We didn't have anybody resign or anything with the Founding Fathers, but now that we do, what do we do about it? So to me, it's a fascinating situation as to the way you look at what goes on, what law is necessary to correct it, and every time that's the case, we always have somebody that doesn't like it. Many southern states did not like the Civil Rights Act. They said, you can't do it. You can't tell me who to have in my restaurant. You can't tell me what to do. You can't any of that stuff. Yet, the court said, yes, we can. Because when things move in interstate commerce from state to state, the federal government can regulate it, and that's what we're doing. There's 10 cases at least that always talk about that situation. So in any event, I know I've kind of kept you, and I could talk for hours on this, but I think my time is up. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed so many people coming out, and you came out because you're interested, and that's the most important reason to do it. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.